Well, they say we need to teach what we most need to learn. And I was teaching what I most needed to learn.
Synchronicity, which is a meaningful coincidence, is where physics and spirituality come together.
Every day you go out there and you are shooting yourself in the foot with a gun, and you don't even realize the smoking gun is still in your hand.
How much time in our day do we spend actually exploring what's within?
If it is possible to gain information that transcends space and time, it means there are no secrets. It's like politics would vanish instantly if there are no secrets.
It is scary to think we have this connection over time and space. So what do we do with that? Like, if that's really real, which we sort of sense that it is, it's terrifying.
Science itself is an act of consciousness. It's what the human mind does. So how can you define science and exclude the human mind?
We cannot be truly happy or peaceful while we're hurting somebody else in any way, shape, or form. It's a world of unity expressed in diversity.
Intuition. I guess tuition is teaching, right? Inner teaching, is that what it means? What does intuition even mean? I'm not even sure what it means.
Our intuition is basically our ability to know what we need to know when we need to know it. It's this divine orchestration of life in our favor and for the higher good.
Although it's become sort of languaged as our sixth sense, this is our first sense. This is absolutely 100% imperative to our daily survival at every level. If your gut doesn't tell you when to step aside or step forward or move away or do this or that, you'll not be very successful in your environment.
I find it very valuable for finding parking spaces. That's not a simple thing. Some people can never find them. I have the damnedest luck with finding a parking space.
My wife would go, I think I'll go in the store on Main Street, and she'd walk in and find our daughter skipping school in that one store. And the daughter complained, I can't get away with anything because Mom was so telepathic with her.
We have the capacity to increase our understanding of what it means to be alive. Why are we here? And even the big questions like, what happens when we die? Is there something after we die?
Everybody is intuitive. Everyone can sense things. For example, if we're going to go to a party, we see someone over there, they seem to be a little shy. We see someone else very outgoing. We feel some people's anger. We feel some people's uptightness. We sense different feelings when we're around people. This is a very common experience, and this is intuition.
It's as integral as looking through my eyes, hearing with my ears. It's part of who I am because it's not something you do, it's something you are.
What we're doing is we're reading out the environment around us, internally and externally. It's an embodied knowing that comes from listening to what wants to happen next.
Most people have had the experience of feeling like somebody's staring at them. And you turn around and sure enough, there are actually a couple of studies that have proven that that's a real sensitivity. That's a real signal. Empathy, feeling what others are feeling through the magnetic, energetic interactions. These are all parts or examples of energetic sensitivity, that type of intuition. And some people actually can feel earthquakes coming. I mean, there really are people with that level of sensitivity.
The analogy I like to give is that if you imagine yourself in a forest, you know that straight ahead is paradise. Now, logically, to your thinking mind, you're like, okay, well, I want to get to paradise. It's straight ahead. I should go straight. But the intuition has the bird's eye view and can see that if you were to go straight, you're actually going to end up at a cliff And the way that it communicates that to you is it gives you a little hit. It gives you a feeling of excitement. It gives you a feeling of adventure. It gives you good feelings that would be enjoyable to listen to. The thinking mind's going like, no, I shouldn't go that way. That looks like the long way around. I should go straight. And you're going to end up having to backtrack and take more time than had you just gone to the left where the intuition was leading you in the first place. So everyone has a sense of intuition. It's just a matter of how much do you choose to listen to it.
Intuition is like a big umbrella for lots of things. I like that. The umbrella analogy is always really good. So intuition has underneath it things like subconscious intuition. I subconsciously hear the thunder, and I knew it was raining even though I didn't know that's how I knew. So that's subconscious intuition. Then there's logical intuition. Like you work long enough, you don't have to think about all the modus ponens or any kind of logical structures. You just have this logical, oh, that makes logical sense. Okay, that doesn't. It just arises. All the rest is sort of background information that you're not really conscious of. Then there's things like precognition, which is not logical intuition. It's not sensory intuition. It's not memory intuition. It's not based on anything that's available in the present moment, as far as we know. It's based on information that seems to be coming from the future.
Non-local intuition is what you can't explain away through the other types that kind of cross the boundaries of time and space.
There's clairvoyance, which means clear seeing, in which you're seeing visually through the inner eye. Usually with eyes closed, you're seeing something in your inner vision. Clairaudience means you're hearing some subtle message. It's not hearing somebody's voice in the room. It's actually you're hearing either words being fed into your mind, or you're hearing perhaps some music, some sounds, but nothing in the environment. And then there's clairsentience, where you get gut feelings. You just have a sense, you're led in a certain direction, you're feeling things. Most people are clairsentient.
So those are the kinds of experiences then that are very similar to what people talk about as mystical, as psychic, and it includes things like channeling and mediumship and possibly near-death experiences, all of that whole realm of unusual experiences that are actually quite common, except that we know very little about them from a scientific perspective.
One of the biggest criticisms about intuition is it doesn't make rational sense, that you can't really prove it in science through science methodology. Here's the most ironic thing about that statement. Part of the scientific process is developing a hypothesis. It's coming up with a hunch that there's a better way to do something.
Some of the most amazing studies come out of somebody's intuition while they're having a shower or even a dream or something like that. They're like, I dreamt that I need to do this experiment. It fits in.
The interesting thing about these things under this umbrella is they all are separated out by where's the information coming from? Is it coming from sense? Is it coming from logic? Is it coming from some kind of sense of the future that we don't understand? And so it sort of presumes this idea that this is all happening via exchange of information or reception of information or processing of information. And that doesn't mean it is. It's sort of a way to think about it that makes sense to people.
You talk about downloads, and I'm wondering if you can describe exactly what that looks like.
Yes, I can talk about my experience. I don't know about other people. I think we all have varied ways of receiving information. I think we have to start first with our state of mind. My precognitive downloads have always come when I'm in a theta brainwave state, which is a light hypnotic state that we are in as we begin to awaken in the mornings. We have delta, theta, then we go into alpha and beta in our busy lives. So it's that kind of half awake, half sleep state where our egos have not come in, that it's just pure consciousness. Downloads have come spontaneously. I've not thought about anything beforehand. They've just arrived, unannounced. They showed me directions to take or actions that will be for my benefit, or sometimes just a loving message, like my first one. They are very clear. They are visceral. I can feel, it's like stepping into time, and I can actually feel the experience of being in that point in time, seeing what's taking place and feeling the experience of what's happening at that point in time, actually living it for a few moments. They have always had a very crucial meaning. They have created turning points in my life. And without them, I'm not sure my mind would have made the best decisions. My father seemed to be a normal, healthy, happy man until I was 7 years old. We moved to Seattle, where he went to work for Boeing, and he was so excited. There came a day when my father was handed a pink slip and told, sorry, we're going to have to lay you off. It really, really destroyed his self-confidence, his self-image. He stayed home every day and drank and smoked and cursed and burped and whatever around us children while my mother went to work. 6 people on a bank teller's salary. So needless to say, our lives were rather meager. My parents really didn't have friends. They didn't have other people they spent time with. It was just the family and work or whatever for my mom. And church. Church was more important than anything to her. It appeared, from my perspective. When I went to her for advice when I was younger, she would tell me, just pray, honey, just pray. My father started to drink when he was a child, like age 12. He began to develop a drinking problem at that young age, and with time, full-blown alcoholism. After he lost his job, he became very violent. My mother would often go to work with black eyes. She would try to make up excuses for him, like my little brother jabbed her in the eye or something when he was in bed with her, something to protect my father. And with the rest of us children, we learned to walk on eggshells as we grew up because he was very, very volatile. He could fly off and send someone flying across the room or hit your head so hard you saw stars. One of my worst memories was watching my father take a hairbrush to my little brother, who was about 4 or 5 at the time, and just systematically beating his little head as hard as he could it was abuse, with the hairbrush, so that he had a little crew cut at the time, and there were raised black and blue welts all over his head. His offense was my little sister was crying, so he was going to punish my brother, if that makes sense. That's what happened. When my mother came home from work, I still remember her saying, oh, John, my father's name was John, you shouldn't do that to the children. And that was it. There was an unwritten rule where you don't talk about what goes on in the house. You don't share what goes on. And so in the outside world, we look like a normal, happy family, pretty much. But inwardly, it was anything but. By age 9, sexual abuse began with me. After he was finished with me, he pushed me off the sofa, I remember, and said, now go play. About age 10, abuse was almost daily. So I would find a way, I'd maybe just run outside and play, or whatever I could to get away from him. And I finally did tell my mom. She said, well, honey, Daddy's just trying to help you. And that was it. And my thought was, help me what? In the summers at my grandparents' house in Idaho, I didn't have to cope. I played and swam and fished and ran and hiked and did everything my tomboy heart desired. There was a big ponderosa pine at the beginning of the trail leading down to the lake. And I could sit under that, what I called my thinking tree. I would imagine what it would feel like, never have to go back. The stale cigarettes and stale alcohol and being afraid all the time. I wanted to stay there with my grandparents. Could never figure out a way the time always came where we had to get in the car and go back. My grandmother one day asked me to walk down to the mailboxes to get the mail for her. I think she had 2 pieces of mail that day. And I was walking along the railroad tracks that led to the paths to our home. And I was walking, balancing on the railroad tracks like kids always do, you know. There seemed to be like a, kind of like a shimmer, something like in the air changed in front of me. And a woman, and she looked quite old. She must have been in her 30s. I was 12, so she looked old. She looked familiar somehow, and she told me, she says, I am an older version of you. And I am here with a message, and that is to let you know that you are deeply loved, and that you will make it through adulthood. You will live, because that was my fear, that I would not live through my childhood. I never imagined what I would look like when I became old in my 30s. Never entered my mind. But I trusted her and carried that message in my heart. I vowed to myself not to tell anyone because people would think I was a bit loopy, a bit crazy, to have experienced something like that. And so no one else knew. But in times of challenge throughout my childhood, I remembered her message, and it really brought me hope. I felt warmth and love within with that. And that was my first download.
My family was a great family, unconditionally loving, wonderful, but also really messed up. And I had a borderline abusive, I would say, abusive situation going on when I was a girl, and I've since healed it. But when this was happening at nighttime, I'm not going to go into it just to not trigger anyone, but I would notice that off to my right-hand side, here's my bed, and off to my right-hand side, there was a rocking chair. It was empty usually. And I saw with my mind's eye an older woman who at the time I didn't recognize was myself, but now that I know what I look like, I see that that was probably myself. And she would just be there with me, and she would just be kind, and she would say, you know what? He loves you. It's a frustrating situation. You're going to be angry at him. It's okay. You should be angry, and you're going to be okay. It's all going to turn out okay. Like again and again, she would just say that kind of stuff. It was very comforting. And as I got older and I started to go into meditation and start to think about this kind of fabric of time stuff with the move the flag and stuff, I thought, well, I'm going to take the flag from the past and I'm going to move it here, and I'm going to have a conversation with my past self, and I'm going to sit in that room with that girl, and I'm going to tell her it's going to be okay, and that it's okay to be angry, and that she's got the right bead on what's going on, and that she's going to turn out fine. And I would do that over and over again when I had the resources. And, I swear that was me in that room. There's this idea of the causality going in both directions. So now you could use as a mental time travel healing tool this idea that anytime you feel that you have an excess experience of love and you're just feeling so resourced and good and everything, so mentally go back and find a time when you're not and love that self.
Can we take what we've seen so far and make it do something that's practical? Because the results we get with those kinds of systems is actually pretty similar to what we get with this. Can we create something which is a mind-matter interaction technology? The theory underneath this is that photons turn from waves to particles as a result of being observed. So can you do that with your mind alone? That's what this experiment tests. The easy way to describe it is to make a psychic garage door opener. You go home, and rather than trying to find the button to open the garage door, you just think open, and it opens. Well, that would be a really silly use of this kind of technology, because we do have buttons that will do it. So we're interested in achieving things that cannot be done through conventional technologies. So I call this a telegraph from the future. In initial stages, you wouldn't be getting like a telephone call from the future, but you might get information, small bits of information from a future state through a technology of this type. So this is a very severe challenge given the state of scientific knowledge. Like, it's pushing us to push very hard against what we think we understand and put it to the test. In many cases, we're going to fail. But that's okay. In the process, we might learn something new.
To me, the third eye is clear vision. That clear vision can be not only totally now in the present moment, but can also have clear vision for potentially things that have happened in the past and also things that are going to happen in the future, and to information, to knowledge that may not be available if the third eye isn't open or clear. Mostly people will relate to the third eye as the pineal gland. I think one of the reasons why it's related as the pineal gland is because it's this pine cone shaped gland. It's in the middle of your brain. Some people have studied it and have shown that there are what's called piezoelectric crystals in it. And these are crystals that actually will emit an electrical current with stress or strain. So some people say that that is the third eye because some people see sort of a clear, a bright light in the middle of your, in the middle of your head somewhere. My hypothesis, and I think some others share this hypothesis, is that it's the space between the pineal gland and the pituitary gland. And the space between the pineal gland and the pituitary gland also has the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is a structure in the brain that essentially controls homeostasis, controls balance, releases important hormones. And there's also the thalamus. So we have the thalamus. The thalamus is an incredible structure. It's sort of like, I call it like a relay center. All our input, all our sensory input goes to the thalamus, and the thalamus helps filter it. It helps to sort of send it to the appropriate parts of the brain. And so it's sort of see it as this relay center. So imagine that there's this space that is, has the pineal gland in the back, that's got the pituitary gland in front, it's got the hypothalamus on one side, it's got the thalamus. That space is called the third ventricle. That's actually encasing the energy of all these, of the pineal gland, the pituitary, the hypothalamus, and the thalamus, all together, as well as from the center, coming up, the central canal, coming in with the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid into the third ventricle, that there's something that happens, some sort of all-chemical transformation that occurs there, and we can get into frequencies and vibrations and all that sort of stuff.
I was 15 when I received my second download. It was so horrible, so scary. I thought it was a nightmare, but yet it seemed so real. So like I could feel everything that was happening. 2 weeks later, that nightmare began to play out for me. I had returned home from high school and was standing at the kitchen sink washing the dishes from breakfast that everyone had left. And my father had been home all day, had been drinking, and he began calling me names and shoving me. I was just doing dishes, for Pete's sake. I remember thinking, gosh, this is what I get for doing the family dishes. He began to shove me and hit me and pushing me down the hallway, where I ended up flat on my back on the bed in the back bedroom. My father's eyes were like nothing I'd ever witnessed before. At this point, he was leaning over me and slugging my face, hitting me as hard as he could. Blood was spurting everywhere. My nightmare, my vision, was playing out just as I'd seen it 2 weeks prior. But the gift of that vision showed me how to save my own life. So, because I was in track and my legs were strong, I pulled my legs back to my chest and let him go right to where it counts, between his legs, and said exactly what the vision showed me, "Get off me, you bastard," which was the first time I ever assaulted my father, ever used profanity with him. He was so stunned, he stopped, bent over to hold himself, and that gave me just enough time to run off the bed and out the door to a neighbor's to call the police. I called my mom to come home early from work, which she did. Seeing the evidence, seeing my face, all black and blue and bloodied, I think finally convinced her that we're living with a man that we shouldn't be living with. she finally left my father. She took all four of us. She rented a home and we stayed with her. Four of us and my mom. It's really great that it didn't last forever. My father came around and next thing we knew, she was back with him. Maybe a year later, not very long, that we lived on our own. It was heaven. That was a turning point in my relationship with my father. From then on, he seemed to have more respect for me. And I can count the vision as the tool, the key to saving my life, showing me what to do. And it worked.
Of the outstanding mysteries in science, number one is the origin of the universe, and number two is the origin of consciousness. It's how is it that we're aware of anything? So from a neuroscience perspective, the assumption is that the brain is like a computer, and somehow the computer is very fancy and it gives rise to subjective awareness, even though nobody knows how that could be. The other assumption, or the other way of thinking about this, is that consciousness is already here. It's like it's in everything to some degree. And the brain then becomes a very particular kind of sensitive organ that can express it in certain ways.
This consciousness that we have access to is not limited by time and space. It's not limited by a physical brain. What is it? And why do we keep insisting on looking inside the head? It's not inside the head. It may be inside the heart. I've always found it fascinating that the ancient Egyptians, when they would be mummifying their pharaohs, would pull out the brain and toss it on the garbage heap, but they would mummify the heart. They knew something that we have forgotten.
Clearly, you're tapped into a field that's non-local, right? The assumption that consciousness is located in your brain or in some part of your body may be completely erroneous. Your body may just be an antenna that's tuned to a certain set of information that's part of a field, right? It's your participation in this field that you call consciousness.
Something comes into my mind that says, ooh, do this experiment. And I'm like, okay. And so then I do the experiment because I feel compelled to do the experiment. And then I find out something and it's different than whatever my thoughts were. And it's always going to be more than what's in my head because my head is just part of the universe. So what I have to be connecting with is something that's bigger than me. I know that. I can say that. And I can also say that it feels good. I can say that it feels positive. It doesn't feel like I'm connecting with something that's bad.
You are in and part of something so intelligent and loving and ever present that's always here, even on a very bad day.
Whether we want to use the word God or source or the universe or life, I don't care. I'm going to use a God just because God wants to give you everything. You know, we are here to live heaven on earth, and life just wants to serve you. It just wants to give, and I don't mean this from a religious sense whatsoever. I just mean this is how reality works. It wants to give you everything. It's paying you to be here in this incarnation. You know, it's like, thank you for coming here. Let me give you everything you want in return.
Max Planck, who is the father of quantum mechanics, was asked in 1931. A reporter came up to him and said, you know, you and Einstein are the most famous scientists in the world. What have you learned? And his response was, what I've learned is that consciousness is causal and fundamental. Space-time arises from consciousness, not consciousness from space-time.
Defining consciousness is a big task in that there are many scientists for hundreds of years who have tried to do that, and conferences around this and journals around it, and I would say that probably nobody has come up with a definition of consciousness that everybody agrees with.
For me, consciousness is awareness, and awareness playing out on many different levels. So it's sentience, it's a sense of a knowingness, an experience, an awareness that is self and individuated.
Probably helps to start with talking about, are we talking about what some would call big C or little c consciousness? Little c tends to be the kind of consciousness that neuroscientists talk about. We're conscious when we wake up in the morning, and we're conscious of the world and our thoughts and perceptions. We go to sleep, we're unconscious. Big C consciousness, it would be the type that a lot of other people think of in terms of, maybe the simplest way to say it would be the intelligence or the information that underlies the creation of the universe and living systems.
Consciousness is all about connectivity. We are all supremely, intrinsically interconnected on every level. Nothing is separate. And when you explore consciousness, when you discover these incredible depths to consciousness and to the conscious experience, we have far more resources to be able to deal with what happens in life and simultaneously to be able to help the people around us.
This idea that there's something that we own personally that is a part of the whole, it makes it feel very likely that we could tap into the whole, that we're already tapped into the whole. And so it's not like we're going to reel in this thing that we don't have. It's actually going to be more like we're going to cultivate a relationship with an aspect of ourselves which is never not there. That's beautiful.
It seems like it should be natural to be interested in the study of consciousness. I mean, it's the one thing we know we have for sure. And yet the thought of the world somehow being other than purely objective, purely reductionistic, and purely materialistic is very scary to people. PAIRD was a research laboratory that was exploring the interaction of human consciousness with various kinds of random physical processes and systems. It was primarily an engineering program because the founder and director of the lab, my late partner, Robert John, was dean of the engineering school when the program was set up. The anomalous phenomena don't trouble me at all, but human nature does. When we first set up the lab, we didn't have a room number or a name for the lab at that time. So I thought I was being very clever. To identify our door, I put a Greek letter psi. It stands for wave function. It stands for psychology. And of course, it stands for psychic phenomena. People would say, why do you have a devil's pitchfork on your door? These were engineers, of course, who wrote Schrödinger equations every day of their life. And I would say, that's not a devil's pitchfork, it's a Greek letter. And they would look terrified.
It wasn't always this way. The taboo is partially an outgrowth of the Enlightenment, when the church and science split.
The reason that consciousness is not fundamental in science, and I got interested in that, why would that happen? And the answer is the Council of Trent. Between 1545 and 1563, the Roman Catholic Curia had a series of meetings in Trentia and Bologna. Science is just beginning to really become a formal force in society.
There were a number of what's called natural philosophers. They weren't called scientists then, they're called natural philosophers, who wanted to understand the world, not just through religion, but through experiment and testing. And so the scientific method was born.
So the church issued an edict, and they said
the religious authorities will look after the souls of everyone, and the natural philosophers were okay as long as they just looked at the physical world.
You guys in science, you have things of materiality. That's fine. Things which involve spirit, read consciousness, that's our bailiwick.
Very sensible, because if you weren't willing to just research the physical world as a scientist, you were potentially under house arrest for the rest of your life as a heretic, as Galileo was, or you were burnt at the stake, like Giordano Bruno was.
The Inquisition actually began in 1232, but it really takes force with the Council of Trent. In general, for most scientists, it became a taboo subject, consciousness. It was just not worth the hassle of getting into. And so they didn't.
But it created a schism, and that schism just grew. And so scientists began to denigrate religion and spirituality sort of kept on its track. So the two just separated, literally, in their worldviews.
And for almost 300 years, that's the way things went. I mean, the last person killed by the Inquisitions in 1826 was a Spanish teacher who taught his students deism, which the Inquisition found to be unacceptable, and they garroted this man in public. And that's not very long ago.
Science brought us, well, first of all, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and on and on. It brought us all the technologies that make our lives so much easier today. But its basic premise was that this material realm, this universe is all there is. There are no other realms beyond it. Its appearance of separation is its true reality. That our universe is essentially an accident. That evolution proceeds by accidents. That after a long time, human beings emerged, evolved, and somehow our consciousness arises from our material brains. Somehow. That was the story. So it's a story of separation, of accident, of meaninglessness, and it's wrong. It's utterly wrong.
You can think of the material world like a superhighway network of information of the universe. You can think of it almost as the mind of the universe, thinking. And as it gets together and it becomes more and more complex, like all the particles get together and they make, a cell, and then the cell divide and make two cells and gets more and more complex. Eventually the flow of information through the whole system has enough bit rate, you can think, to become self-aware. The danger there is that when it becomes self-aware, it might think that it's separate from the rest of the universe, because it doesn't know it's part of this flow of information. It's thinking, wow, how did I get here? And what is this universe? You see? And that's really what's happened to the humankind.
You take then the theories that we understand from a materialistic perspective and try to say, well, given those theories, how would you explain how telepathy can exist or precognition? And you can do some hand-waving on that to come up with ideas. But it's not very persuasive to most scientists. You do surveys of what people have actually experienced. The vast majority, up to 90% of people, including scientists and engineers, say that they have had these experiences. But you also learn very quickly in the academic world that only certain ideas are acceptable to talk about in public. So one of the reasons why we don't talk about it in public is because it sounds weird. We don't know how to make the connection yet between our internal experience, of which there's a very broad range of strange things that can happen, and our models about the way the world works. So the academic system around the world pretty much uncritically accepts materialism as the only viable way, or the only acceptable way, to understand how things work. One of the reasons for that is because it's so successful. Most science is working directly in the mode of, let's deconstruct this thing and then we'll figure out it at a very small level. We use reductionism. It works. It works really well. It just doesn't work for everything. The other thing, of course, is that when you go through a scientific career, nobody is taught philosophy. Like, why would you need to take philosophy of science? Why would you need to know about the sociology of science? Those are considered very soft from a scientific perspective, so they're generally not taught, so you can end up being a professor who has never taken a course in philosophy and don't realize that what you're studying is set on a whole bunch of assumptions, some of which may be true and some may not be so true.
I was always a good student, but in my household, there was never, ever any talk about going to college or university. Never. I decided after that whole scenario with my father, I'm going to marry my high school boyfriend. When we're old enough, we'll get married and we'll live happily ever after because, that's what happens when you get married. He had been inducted into the military at that point. I thought I had it all figured out. And then I went, as that old saying goes, from the frying pan into the fire. He had not told me he was going away to war in 2 weeks before he married me. So I felt betrayed by him at the get-go. So he came back different. When I hugged him, I remember I felt like I was hugging a stranger. I don't know this person anymore. His medication to get him through everything, of course, was what was available: drugs, alcohol. I wanted to try to help him heal himself and to stop his drinking because, my God, that's what I was trying to get away from, was alcoholism. To make a long story short, we lost our home. He was seeing another woman, spending more time with her than he was with me. I finally came to the point where I thought, I'm so sick of this. I can't take it anymore. I stuck with him because of the same reason I allowed my father to touch me at age 9. It was called fear.
In life, usually it's easier to get a relationship going or to get a job than to quit it. Why? They're hanging on because of fear of change. My expression that I came up with that helped me with this, that I actually had a person gift me with a sign on the wall, is fear is expensive, love is real, choose wisely. Some people say fear is a prayer for what you do not want, because it's highly energized thought, and you're thinking a negative thing, like, I hope I don't have an accident today. People who are in a fear loop repeat over and over experience.
Fear had been rampant throughout my life. It was my motivator quite often, all too often. I was afraid. I was afraid that I wasn't worth a better marriage than that my self-worth was still rather low and it hadn't gotten high enough for me to trust that I could actually move on and be all right, because this wasn't working.
One of the hardest things to understand is simply this, that we are programmed. We've all been programmed. We talk about the brain being a computer. It is a computer beyond anything that humans have created. First, you have to put in a program so you can operate the computer. I'm a young boy. How do I know what the rules are to be a member of a family and to be a member of a community? There are rules. You can't go out and do what you want. I said, well, where do you get the rules from? A young kid doesn't read a book. I say, nature helped them out. Said, you want to know the rules? Put you in record. Watch your parents. Watch your siblings. Watch your community. What you're observing is not going into the conscious mind. It's not functioning at that level. What you're observing is going download straight into the subconscious mind. So where do you get your behavioral programs from? Not from you. You get them by observing people, teachers, mom, dad, siblings, and community. I observe them, download them. What got downloaded into your subconscious programming was never reviewed by you. It wasn't filtered by you. I said, what does that mean? I said, I can get good programs and bad programs. I'm just getting programs. So I have no understanding when the programs are coming in. Are these really good or bad? I'm just recording. So unfortunately, about 70% of those programs are disempowering, self-sabotaging, limiting beliefs that we acquire. So I say, I'm getting programmed, and most of them are not going to strengthen my existence on this planet.
All those programs that we take on by the time of age 7, most of that programming is intact. It's subconscious, but it's there. It still runs our lives. So I had to become aware of those types of things to begin to shift and change them.
Who am I? How did I get to be this person? What aspects of my life have taught me how not to be, and what ones do I run with because I've been taught how to be?
So I came to a point where I told him, you either get to stay with me, quitting alcohol 100%, getting some help to do that, or I am gone. I will divorce you. Obviously, he did not believe me. One night, I returned home from work to our then apartment after losing the house. And he says, I've made my choice. I'm out with my friends. I'm drinking. I choose alcohol. And I remember saying, okay, you've made your choice. I will begin the divorce.
When we go through psychological healing, or when we go through any type of healing to heal our past, there needs to be levels of acceptance of what was. And then I would take someone through a process of writing down all the negative aspects of their life And then I would ask them the question, what have you learnt from it? What have you learnt to be and what have you learnt not to be? Every challenge in life is an opportunity to grow.
I remember shaking afterwards, like, wow, I actually did this. I actually said that I'm going to divorce him. I'm really going to do this. I'm really going to be free. And I remember feeling so elated, like, wow, I have lifted 1,000-pound weight off my shoulders, because living with him was like that. It felt like every day, what's next? What's going to happen next? What am I going to have to contend with now? And I did follow through with the divorce, which was finalized on Valentine's Day. I remember it was February 14th. And I remember that was one of the happiest Valentine's Day I could remember. And from that time forward, my life has been moving up, 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 up. That one day when I told him, fine, this is it, was a huge turning point for me, where I really stepped into my power.
One of the basic operating frameworks I use is the framework of story or narrative, or you could even call it mythology. Understanding that our mythology, by which I mean our deep stories that define who we are and what's real, our mythology creates our systems. But then in turn, our systems create our mythology by the way that they create us as story makers.
There's a psychological construct called future orientation. So that's the extent to which you look toward the future timeline or your future horizon in a positive way. And it correlates with education, health, well-being outcomes. There have been pretty cool experiments with folks who live in dangerous conditions. If they get training in future orientation, they do better, right? They're more likely to graduate from high school, for instance.
So if you're immersed, for example, in a money economy, then you're going to be predisposed to believe that your well-being is contrary to my well-being, that more for you is less for me. So our experience of being in a highly monetized society generates the story that maintains the highly monetized society.
People who are at the intersection of incarceration, poverty, addiction, abuse, trauma, people who you wouldn't think that the future orientation would be positive, because frankly, why would it be, right? But if you could build technology, or if I can build technology that could help draw that out, I guess that's what I'm doing with my hands, draw out the future orientation in a positive way, then that could help people live better, happier lives.
It's not necessarily about creating a new story. It's about recognizing the next story that resonates the most with who we want to become.
There was a very important inflection point in Einstein's discoveries that was missed by historians generally. Space-time, as he described space and time being this fabric that could bend to produce gravity, was interpreted as only an analytical tool to describe reality, meaning that it was a mathematical model and it had no physicality to it. The result was that there was no need anymore to have this fluid dynamic space that used to be called the ether. And so the ether, which was the medium from which all waves moved and all the dynamics occurred, was replaced with a conceptual model called space-time. Einstein went along with it for over 10 years and eventually realized that relativity required an ether, that space be filled with this energy, with this field. But by then it was too late. Physicists had taken off with a certain view. When he tried to put it back in, they ignored him. That didn't make him so popular in the physics community. So the result is that ether was removed. And I think that was probably one of the biggest downfall to understanding our universe and the physics of it until modern age.
We want to find a theory of everything. Well, in physics, everything is matter, energy, space, and time. Those are the four things that encompass everything. And now we have, quite possibly, information added to that. Information is an aspect of reality that's as fundamental as those other things.
Let's just start from the beginning. Imagine that space is made of little particles that are oscillating. these little particles, these little fluctuations are occurring at a scale that's so far removed from what we experience daily that we have no idea it's there. Think of these little bits of fluctuation as bits of information. They're flowing in a coherent manner together, like trillions of them, billions of them. Imagine the amount of sand, grains of sand you could put in a bubble from the sun to Alpha Centauri, 40 trillion kilometer bubble. The sand would be very, very fine, like very small resolution compared to the bubble. So imagine the number of grains of sand. Well, imagine all these are moving coherently because they're stuck in this like vortex. They're spinning together. And that region of space we call a proton. We, I think, wrongly assume that the event of becoming conscious was just a random fluke, that all of a sudden we became aware of our existence. We started being able to ask questions about what is the universe, how did we get there, and all this stuff, which is really not obvious that this would occur just from random function.
Physics is a way of studying the fundamentals of space and time and reality and energy and what the physical world is. You know, scientists studying physics are trying to get the same answers or to the same questions, essentially, that people on a spiritual path are, but they phrase those questions differently.
It's the result of the mechanics of information flowing through the structure of reality. It is a highly coordinated effort of reality to produce something that would eventually become aware of itself. It is a consequence of reality itself, not some epiphenomena occurring in your brain. So that changes a lot of how we think of ourselves and how we think of the universe around us.
We can't get a theory of everything until we understand how to describe meaning in the world. And it's meaning that gives everything we do any kind of significance.
It's sort of like the story, you know, of the blind men with the elephant. One feels the trunk and says, oh, it's a snake. The other one feels a leg and says, no, it's a tree. And another one feels the tail and says it's a rope. But they're not looking at the whole thing. And we do not look at the whole thing usually, especially in the scientific academic world where we're all specialists.
It's like the hose worrying about, like, how do I get the water?
We are only looking at one piece of the picture.
You know, or the toaster being like, how do I get the electricity? That's not your business. You're either plugged in or you're not. And when you're plugged in, you can make toast. And when you're not plugged in, you can't. So, yeah, not my area.
So
Both my pay grade.
What are you plugged into?
What does a toaster plug into?
What are you
if I'm the
plugged
toaster?
into? Yeah.
I don't know. So, like, scientifically, I have to say, like, there's a lot unknown here. I mean, this is the question of where does creative impulse come from? Really, that's the question you're asking. You know, where does creative impulse come from?
If you actually look at creative genius, what you see is that it is a process of opening to non-local consciousness. The people we think of historically as geniuses are very explicit about this. Pablo Picasso, for instance, people wondered how he could paint so fast. He could make these paintings very quickly. What he would do is stare at the canvas until he saw the painting on the blank canvas, and then he would paint it. Leonardo da Vinci says exactly the same thing. He says, I stare at the canvas until I can see the painting, and then I paint it. Einstein says he saw the theory of relativity one day after being sick. As he was recovering, he went out in a canoe and was just sort of paddling around and suddenly had this breakthrough. Robert Louis Stevenson said he would go to sleep at night giving what he called the gremlins of his mind a suggestion to produce a story. And of course, he became a famous writer. Frank Lloyd Wright is commissioned to build a house we know as Falling Waters. And he puts it off, and he gets a telephone call. We'll be there in an hour to see the blueprints. And in an hour, because he has had this vision of this house, he produces these blueprints. So by the time they get there, they don't know. I mean, everything's just as it should be. Brahms says, I'm in an altered state of consciousness. And in that state, like Beethoven, I hear the music, I see the rhythms, see the chords, the juxtaposition of the notes. Mozart, same thing. Nikola Tesla says that he saw the electric motor as a vision as he was walking across Central Park. Went back to his laboratory and told his engineers, build this, not prototype it, or we'll try this and then maybe won't work and we'll try this. He just said, build this. And they did, and they plugged it in and turned it on, and it was the electric motor. So you see this over and over and over again. First-tier people who are known for their creative genius all talk to you about what amount to non-local consciousness experiences.
So it comes from somewhere, but I don't think it's a spatial location. You know, I don't think we can think about it in space-time. It might be from like the quantum vacuum, if you want to think about it scientifically. When I began the divorce proceedings, I moved into a guest bedroom of a dear friend's home for a little while so I could collect some money from my work, enough to support me living in my own space, which I did. And I began just adventuring out into the world, just doing things I had not done before. And one of them was playing volleyball. I liked sports. I liked to run and cycle, and I'd kind of given all that up. I was just trying to hang on during that marriage. So I began to be free, feel free again. After a couple of years, I met a man who became my next husband, husband number 2. He was 16 years older than I am. And I thought, he's too old for me. My friends said, you know, he's a nice, stable man. He owns his own business. He has money. He would take, you would be comfortable living with him. Why don't you give him a try? I did have a download about getting involved in teaching. I was invited into a women's support group in Seattle. One of the key elements that they really focused on is how not to be a victim. Prior to that, I'd been to psychiatrists and all kinds of special help, but nothing impacted me like going to this program. I began to grow and change in leaps and bounds and wanted to become more involved with this organization. After we go through the programs, we have an interview with one of the staff. I told this woman I dreamt that I would be working here with you somehow. I would like you to keep it in mind. If you have any openings, I'd love to come join you. Just about 2 days later, this woman called me and she says, you know that vision, that kind of dream thing you had? She says, why don't you come downtown to my office and let's talk about this. And I began working for them. So it began to open up new horizons for me. For many years, my second marriage worked well, but our worlds began to grow apart after a couple of decades with him. We moved to Idaho, built a home on the lake across from where my grandparents lived. He wasn't around very much anymore. He would travel to meet with customers. I think he said that he put over 80,000 miles on his vehicles every year. I saw him maybe on weekends. Our values had changed. There were several years where I was quite unhappy in the marriage and feeling stuck. Like, here I am in the place I love to be more than anywhere in the world. Life was blissful in that regard, in the situation I was, but not in the marriage. And so there was an inner stress within me for about, at least 5 years. Growing. What to do? I want to live where I live. I don't want to be with this man. I had never really been on a spiritual path. I had relinquished the fundamental Christian upbringing because I felt that did not work. That was not for me. I was searching. I was really searching at that point for answers. I learned about natural healing when I began to explore spirituality. In discovering spirituality, I also explored, and I'm still exploring, will probably never stop exploring, quantum physics. I'm fascinated with it.
to me, it all meshes together. Spirituality, natural healing, quantum physics. They're kind of the same base. And that is that everything is vibration and energy and information. Everything. My body, your body, everything. Having that foundational understanding that everything is energy, vibration, information, we're talking about the field. Since that's what we're made of, we can heal with energy.
My story really goes back to when I was 7 years old, which was quite a long time ago now. I was really sick with the measles, and the plan was that I was going into the hospital the next day. I was going to be admitted, and I was going into something called an oxygen tent. Now, the tent part of that sounded interesting as a 7-year-old, but I was too sick to really think much about it. My parents came into the room. I'm lying there on the couch feeling really, really ill, and my mother said to my father, "Honey," she said, "will you kneel down and say a prayer so that our boy will be able to get well?" And so they did. Now, knowing my dad, I'm sure it was the first time I'd ever heard my dad actually pray, but I think they were really worried about me. I was really sick. And in the middle of this, something happened to me. I had this change that started at the top of my head, and it went whoosh through my body to the soles of my feet that fast, and I was completely, totally healed, just in an instant. Now, to go from being really sick one moment to being completely, vibrantly, totally healthy in the next instant is just so impossible and so crazy that you don't ever forget it. And so I don't remember anything else when I was 7. Most of us don't, but I remember every detail of that like it happened yesterday. I held my tongue until my dad was done praying, which didn't take long. And when he was done, I said, "I'm better. I'm totally better." And they said, "Well, honey, that's fine. Go back to sleep. Tomorrow you're going to the hospital." And the next day proved it. I was completely well. So that taught me that there's a higher power that we can draw upon. And we can ask for help from that higher power. We can refer to that power as God or Father or whatever. And it's different depending on, people's belief systems and so on. But I've come to the absolute conclusion that that higher power is aware of everything we're doing all the time and is willing to help us if we ask for help. When I was in practice, because I had learned that there is this higher power, I went into practice and I got into the habit, working with patients, of asking for help from that higher power with every person that I saw. And it was just a momentary pause, really. It was a totally private, totally personal habit. Nobody ever knew that I was doing that. But everybody that I saw for many, many years, I would just take a moment and just ask for help from that higher power to work on that person.
One day, I was on an airplane heading to Glasgow. I'd never been to this part of the world from the northwestern U.S. And I had this thought, if this plane went down, it would be okay with me. It would be an easy way out. And I remember I was shocked at having a thought like that. I'd never had thoughts like that. And then it occurred to me when I stopped and really looked inside myself, you are so unhappy. I'm so unhappy in my marriage. It's like I really couldn't admit it to myself fully until that moment. I was part of the teaching team that went to present at the University of Glasgow. I thought I must have the worst jet lag ever because I was depressed, I was lethargic, I didn't have any energy, I felt kind of achy all over. Our whole group was scheduled to take a tour of Scotland, which I did, but I didn't enjoy it very much because I just didn't feel like myself. And I'd sit with my nose in a book and not even look out the window half the time at the glorious Scottish countryside. I didn't participate in the teaching team. I stayed in my room and rested. By the time I returned home to Idaho, the symptoms were really growing. When I showered, it looked like my whole head of hair was left there. And I'd feel my hair and think, God, have I got any left? It was so painful in my knees, I could barely make it up and down the stairs. Every day, new symptoms would come. I looked at my hands and they were swollen and they were stiff and they were also really painful. They kind of looked like baseball gloves. They had turned leathery and stiff and hard. If I just laid flat on the sofa, I had no pain. But that is not a way to spend a life. My local doctors didn't know what to do with me. They said, you need to get to a rheumatologist and be diagnosed because it seems like you have some kind of autoimmune disease or something. We don't know what it is. I was very humbled. I was embarrassed because I was teaching energy healing. I was supposed to be living health, example of health, to be teaching energy healing, and I wasn't. Finally, there came a point when I could no longer dress or undress myself. If I fell down, I could not pick myself up. People like my husband at that time saying, you should just get a wheelchair. Just get a wheelchair and make it easy on yourself. But I refused to do that. When it came to the point that my eyesight was beginning to fade, and I spent a full week in Seattle for emergency testing, I was taken to a small consultation room by this female rheumatologist to be given my diagnosis and prognosis. She told me, you have a rare disease. It's called scleroderma. And it's an excess buildup of collagen under your skin. I know it's painful, but you're going to have it for the rest of your life. This disease will not go away. You will be an invalid the rest of your days. You have to get used to this. And then I was sent home.
If people are programmed that their health is beyond their control,